Hi, welcome to Board Game Express. Today, we're going to rules blitz Caverna. Now, Caverna is a worker placement game that is going to take course over 12 rounds, and in each round, you're going to have 5 parts. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to shuffle up the action cards that have the lowest tier on them, so they are tier 1, 2, 3, and 4, and randomly choose one to place on the following action space. And then the second thing you're going to do in each turn is you're going to refill these action spaces that have this little arrow pointing on them with the indicated resource. Now, several of them just have a single printing, so you just fill that with a stone, but some of them have a parenthetical, and what that means is if the action space is empty, you fill it with the standard fare. If, however, nobody took it in the previous turn and there is still something on it, you will only refill it with what is inside the parentheses. So, for example, this action space gets 3 whenever it's empty, but if no one took it and there's still some wood on here, it would only get the 1 instead. All right, so let me put a donkey on this new action space. Now, the third thing you're going to do on the turn is the beef of the game. It's going to be placing all of your workers, and everyone's going to start with 2. So in turn order, let's say blue happens to be first, you are going to choose one of the action spaces and do whatever it says. Now, a lot of the action spaces are simply gather resources. Some of them are placing tiles. Some of them are harvesting or sowing. And occasionally you are going to be able to what's called furnish a room, and later in the game you're going to grow more workers. But essentially, whenever you place your worker, and you're going to do the action completely, and then the next person's going to get to go. And of course you cannot place on the same location, so somebody does this, takes the ruby, etc., etc. Now, at the end of the action phase, everyone is going to take all of their workers back, however many they used, and then you are going to do what's called a harvest check, basically. You're going to check to see what kind of harvest you're going to have. In the beginning of the game, the first 2 rounds do not have a harvest, so you're not going to do anything yet. But starting with the 3rd round, you're going to have partial or full harvests. And when that happens, you are going to want to follow your harvest card. So during a regular harvest, so for example, round 3 is going to have a regular harvest, you are going to do these 3 things in that precise order. First, you are going to harvest your fields, so anything that you have built previously that has crops on it, so like grain or vegetables, you are going to take 1 from each of those fields and put it in your personal supply where it can now be used for food. Second, you are going to have to feed all of your family members. Now, regular family members take 2 food, and any baby, so any worker that has just appeared, so the action space number 4 here is where it's first going to appear. Anytime you have a new worker created, that person only eats 1. So on the turn I created a new worker, for example, I'm going to eat 2 food, 4 food, and then a 5th food for the new guy. So if you cannot pay your food, of course, you are going to have to take a begging marker. Those are -3 points. Not good. Now, to that end, I'm going to point out that at the bottom of each player's board is this little conversion chart, where it is going to tell you what amount of food each of the items in the game will convert to. So, for example, at the very top is coins, which are effectively victory points. If you turn coins into food, you're going to get 1 less food than the amount of coins you turned in. So 2 coins becomes 1 food. Animals are also going to be things that you can immediately convert to food. No action necessary, no building necessary. These are conversions you can do at any time on your turn. Also of note, a pair of donkeys will give you 3, but a single donkey will only give you 1. So if you're going to convert your donkeys, try to do it in pairs. So yeah, food conversion at any time when you need to feed. Then the third thing that's going to happen during the harvest is after you've successfully fed, any animals that made it to the breeding phase are going to breed. So in order to breed, you have to have 2 animals of the same kind. Notice that the picture only includes farm animals. Dogs in this game are not considered farm animals. They will not have a breeding phase. But if you have 2 of a type of farm animal and you have space, you will breed one new version of that animal. So no matter how many you have, you are only going to breed one. So if you have 10 sheep, you still only breed one sheep, assuming you have space for it. Now, very important to understand that under normal rules, if you cannot house any animals you collect on an action space, you are allowed to immediately convert those animals into food. But you cannot do that with the incoming baby. In order to receive that incoming bred animal, you have to first have space to house it, and then if you choose to, you can convert it. So be very careful of the timing. So a standard harvest is going to be harvest your fields, feed your people, and then breed your animals. All right, so that is the overall arc of how a round is going to go. Each round is going to have new card reveal, new actions, all the action spaces refill, place all your workers, pull them back, and do what the harvest indicates. Now, later on in the game, after the first 5 turns, you're going to have a random harvest event. So at the reveal of the card at the beginning of the turn, you're going to choose randomly one of these 7 markers to flip up. And then you're going to reference this chart here. If you reveal a regular green harvest symbol, that means a regular harvest. If you reveal one of these red symbols, you are going to place them in order 1, 2, 3 on the top to the bottom, and that will tell you what happens on that harvest. So the first red you draw is no harvest, the second one you're going to pay 1 food per dwarf instead of a harvest, etc., etc. So eventually all 7 will be revealed, 4 regular harvests, 3 of these little red question marks. Just do whatever is appropriate. All right. Now, the other things to kind of talk about is the worker spaces that you take are all going to be explained either in the action space itself or in a picture, but there are a couple of useful things to know. So these 5 action spaces here will give you a new what's called a twin tile. So a tile that is either going to expand the inside of your cave or the outside of your cave, the forest area. Now, when you place one of these, it has to touch the 2 developed spaces that you own at the beginning of the game. So you start the game with 1 room that houses 2 of your initial workers and 1 empty room right here. If you build more tunnels or caverns, then it has to, in some way, touch what you already have. If in the event you cover something eventually someday, so let's say you build out to here eventually, you get what you cover. So this space will give you 2 food whenever it is that you cover it up. Other sort of common sense things, you are not allowed to build one thing on top of each other. You cannot overhang under normal conditions. There is a building that will allow you to break that rule. But things have to touch. You also, of course, this is cave here, this is forest here. You can't do something like that. So sort of follow what makes sense. And then the outside is going to be forest. Now, in the cave, you're either going to turn things into tunnels, little plus sign looking things, or an open cavern, which will eventually be able to build a room. On the outside, you're either going to create fields, which are someday going to have vegetables on them, or you're going to have a pasture, which will be for the purposes of housing animals. So let's talk about that in a little bit more detail, particularly about the animals. I'm going to just demonstrate, so imagine this was on your board. So normally, at the start of the game, you can house a pair of animals in your opening room. So not only can you put your 2 initial workers there, you're allowed to have pair of animals there, so 2 sheep, whatever. But later on in the game, you're going to need more ways of housing them. So what are some of the things you can do? One is you can build sheds. There will be an action space for that. A shed in an open pasture will be able to hold 1 and only 1 animal. You may not place a shed on a field. The field is for sowing vegetables. You're not going to build an animal shed on it. Another thing you can do is you can build fences. So there's an action space for that. If you fence in an area, that area will now be allowed to hold 2 animals per fenced in space of the same kind. You can never mix animals, you can never mix farm animals in one here. So like pig, cow, they would fight or something. Can't do that. So you can hold 2 in there. If you build a larger fence, so you can build a double fence, you'll actually grab a different tile to visually represent it. That is 2 spaces, so 2 and 2. You can hold 4 animals in there. Now, you can also build a shed inside a fenced pasture. If you do that, it doubles the capacity of whatever the space is. So in this case, it would double from 4 to 8. If you doubled a singleton, it would double from 2 to 4. All right, and finally, actually, 1 or 2 more things. On the outside space, you can actually build a stable out in the middle of nowhere. Normally, when you build a tile, they must connect to your kind of starting setup. But if you build a shed, you can actually just put it wherever you want. It does not count as clearing the space, so it would not earn this boar, for example. But if you put a shed in the middle of the forest, that will actually hold 1 boar each. And you can later clear that forest if you want to turn it into a pasture, and that would be able to house any type of animal. And another thing is that mines, so ore mines and ruby mines, each mine is allowed to hold 1 donkey. So you'd be able to stack it like this on your board. And then finally the dogs. Now, dogs in and of themselves do not require space. They can reside anywhere, so you can just put them wherever you want on your board. But dogs are also useful in that every dog that is sitting in a cleared pasture like that, or I guess a meadow without fences on it, they will be able to watch 1 more sheep than available dogs. So if you have 1 dog, they'll watch 2 sheep. If you put a pair of dogs there, they'll watch 3 sheep together. So that is another way to house your animals. So those are all the ways to house your animals, but keep in mind, if you run out of space, you are allowed to collect and then instantly convert your animals. All right, now another thing to kind of understand, let me put that guy back, is that during the game you will probably collect some rubies, and rubies are another resource that you can use instantly. So the player aid on the back of the harvest card that everyone gets is going to basically show you all the things that you can do with a ruby, and a lot of them are just get a resource. You can also pay a food to get a cow along with your ruby, but several of the actions are to actually do something. So for example, you can clear forest, or you can clear out cave space by using a ruby, and since these can be done at any time, they can actually be timed with your worker action. So for example, let's say you were about to take your turn and take a specific action space and you had some rubies sitting around. You can actually sometimes spend some of those rubies to kind of set up your board a little bit and then be able to do the action, whereas you might not have been before. Like maybe you clear out a room so that you can take a furnishing. Or maybe you can even create some fields out of nowhere so that when you take the sow action, you can put a lot more down. So just kind of understand that rubies are a very important resource for you to use. If you are going to collect them, don't just sit on them. Try to do something with them. They're very helpful. All right. And finally, let's explain. Let me put out this action space because it's worth talking about. There he is. So this action space is the first example of what's called blacksmithing, or creating a weapon. Now your dwarves in this game start off basic. They're sort of, think of them as peaceful dwarves. But this action space is how you build weapons. So pay 1 to 8 ore in order to put that numbered weapon on your dwarf. So this space is, let's say I paid 5 ore. I would then find the 5 marker. And now my dwarf is a level 5 combat dwarf. That's what he is able to do. Then you get to take advantage of these little shield and axe symbols with the number in them. That is telling you how many explorations you get to do. So 3 explorations. Now you get to take a reward that number of times up to and including the level of your dwarf. So if I send a level 5 dwarf on 3 explorations, I can take 3 rewards up until level 5. Now, you may not take the same one. So if you get 3 rewards, you have to take 3 different rewards. That's very important to note. And at the conclusion of your action, so once you've taken the three things, your dwarf is going to level up. A little stronger than he was before, so he's going to gain a +1, and he's now a level 6 dwarf. Now, one thing to be a little careful of is if you do end up picking up some warriors, then there's something that's going to happen. So let's say this is later in the game and green managed to put together two workers and a warrior worker together. So he built a worker and he made a warrior. On your turn, when you are placing a worker, you are supposed to place the lowest weapon leveled warrior, which the ones who are not warriors are considered level 0, so they're not warriors at all. So I would actually have to place this worker first, then this one, and then on my third would I be allowed to put the warrior. Now, if you wanted to break that rule, that's one of the things printed right down there, you would have to pay a ruby. So one of the things you can do with a ruby is you can let your biggest warrior sort of cut the line. So pay a ruby, and you can say, well, you know what, I'm going to place my warrior first. Boom, I go on that space. Or actually, he's not allowed to go on that space. He already has a weapon. But one of the other warrior spots. So those are sort of all the interesting new mechanics that are in the game. But the basics of it are you are trying on your turn to take a worker space. You are going to be growing your fields. You are going to be creating more animals through breeding and collecting them through various means, possibly using rubies to gain access to some of the really hard to get animals. And then you're going to be clearing fields. And at the end of 12 rounds, that is going to be the end, and you're going to have to score up. And to that end, you have this handy dandy scoring pad that you'll probably want to check out. So for the most part, everything in the game is going to score. Every ruby's worth a point, every farm animal, and even every dog is worth a point. Coins are worth points. Each worker's worth a point. Each space that you cleared is worth a point. In that, there's a penalty for every space you don't do anything with. That's a -1. So when you put something there, you've sort of developed it. And then you're just going to score up all the victory points printed on anything you built, including mines have points on them, pastures have points, etc., etc. And finally, your end game, you're going to have a couple of buildings that players have built that score resources. Now, your resources at the end don't score normally, like any excess wood or rock would not normally score, unless you built an appropriate building that allows you to score those things. And once you've scored up, whoever has the highest points is the winner. And now you know how to play Caverna.
18 minutes.
Not bad.